What's up, bros, and welcome to another Brograph Talk. I'm Dave Koss, and today I'm going to be talking about contracts. So many people ask about contracts and whether they should have one, which the answer is yes. And it's kind of like the question, how much should I charge? Every time I hear somebody answer the question about contracts, they basically say, well, you got to do this, and you got to do this, but I can't give you advice, blah, blah, blah. You got to get a lawyer. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over a generic contract that I usually use for people and explain it. I'm not going to provide it out there. You'd have to write it yourself because I'm not a lawyer, and so this isn't legal advice. Basically, what you can do if you want to write a contract is get some sort of template. You could get anything off the internet. You could use what I'm giving you, and then you give that to a lawyer and you have them look it over. And there you go. Now, contracts vary depending on what I'm doing personally. Sometimes I'm doing video, sometimes I'm doing graphics, sometimes I'm doing a combination of the two. It just changes, but I'm going to kind of go over this generic agreement, which I don't like to call it a contract. I like to call it an agreement because I think it's a little less scary for people. I know that a lot of people that do motion graphics, for example, will get a client and they may be like a medium-sized or a small business. And when they hear the word contract, they get a little scared of that word. So I like to call it an agreement. I like to call it a service agreement because that's what it is. It says we're going to do this and we're going to do this and you're going to provide us with this money when you're done and we're going to go on our way and everybody's going to be happy, right? So I'll start by going over this. Here's what I usually do. I usually have a nice header with my logo on it, and I, put the name on there, and then I put the project name, like my business name, my project name, and then it says service agreement, and then it says version 1 because you could end up amending this or making new versions of it, like 0.1 or even a full version, like version 2, if things change from here to there. Usually I'll do a 0.1 if they request I change the wording on something, which never really happens. But I'll do version 2 or version 3 if they actually do a change order. And I'll explain that in a minute. So, number 1, overview. This is the first thing that I put in an agreement. So, it basically says that your company, and so for this example, I'm going to use Brograph as the company, and then I'll just say client for client, I guess. So Brograph proposes to create a graphics package for client. The following outline summarizes the video as well as the cost involved, and the client will require the services of Brograph to produce the video from concept to completion. Just a brief overview of what you're going to do. Deliverables. Now, I'm going to use motion graphics for this example. So motion graphics animation based on what we talked about. So you can fill in the blank there, what you and your client talked about. You could say based on the examples you sent me or based on our conversation or, based on our emails. All media to be delivered via whatever as whatever. All media to be delivered via FTP, via email, via Dropbox, whatever you want to say there, as what I usually put ProRes 422 or ProRes 444 if there's an alpha channel. And then I actually write that in there, ProRes 444 if there's a need for an alpha channel. And then I go into the creative process. That's the next line I put on there. So recommended creative process, concept stills delivered and signed off via email. And I usually put a 3-step process. Now, a 3-step process has worked really well for me, and there's a good reason for that. Back in the day, I used to just do approvals. I would make some changes, and I'd send it back, and people would say, oh, yeah, that's cool, but could you change this? And I would change that, and I would send it back to them, and then they'd say, oh, that's cool, but could you also change this? And my thought was like, well, why didn't you tell me that in the first place before I went in, did all the changes, rendered it out, rendered a web copy, uploaded it back to the web, sent you an email. I don't like to do that process a lot of times. And you'll find that if you are very clear from the beginning that your creative process is a 3-step process, 4 if you want, then I think your clients end up being a little bit more careful in how they send you feedback. Because if they know you're going to go back 100 times, they'll go back 100 times, back and forth, over and over. I want to change this, and now I want to change this, and now I want to change this back. Well, that gets really time consuming for you. And if you've quoted a fixed amount, for example, or if you know that they're not going to want to increase the hours, you're starting to run on your own time. And all that uploading and all that stuff, your time should be paid for when you're doing all of that. So I usually do step 1, which is a rough draft. And what I'll usually do is send stills just to make sure we're on the right track, and still as part of part 1, give them some sort of rough draft animation. Very rough. It could be a wireframe. As far as you want to take that rough draft so that they can just get an initial look before you've gone too far into what you're doing, because you don't want to spend all this time and then have to take a million steps back. The second phase is production, and the third phase is rendering. So you animate, here's what I've written. Animating assets based upon the final concept mentioned above. This includes creating the necessary animation, simulations, 3D models, and video assets. This stage consists of 3 milestones. The rough milestone with a watermark. Now I'll pause right there. If you want to put a watermark, you can. Some people don't like that. Some people can't do that, which I understand. If you're working for somebody who's integrating what you're working on into another video, and they have a client, and maybe even that person has a client, and you're 4 steps down the chain, you can't put your own watermark on it. So there's other things that you can do in that case to protect yourself. Instead of a watermark, you could say that you have to have X amount of dollars down before you will not do a watermark. You can do that. And I'll talk about down payments and not having down payments and net 30, net 60, net 90, all that as we get further down in this agreement. So you've got your rough milestone with or without watermark. You've got a 90% deliverable. So the rough milestone is that rough animation you sent. The 90% deliverable is your production round. This is where you're doing most of the work. And when you get into the 90% deliverable, then the client needs to know that you are way on track at this point, and everything that they've approved is because you are going to move forward with this whole thing, and you're going to put this whole thing together. So you've got the 90% deliverable, then the polish round. The polish round happens after production. You send it to them, you get approval, they say, okay, we're almost good except for A, B, and C, and then you do that polish round, and then you do your rendering, and your final product is delivered, and that's basically number 3. Now, some people like to do 4. Some people like to give them that production 90%, get feedback on it, and then they've got 95% in there, like a 95% deliverable, and then the final round that they actually deliver. You can do that if you want. And it says, final product will be delivered with the guarantee from the client that payment will be made within, okay, now this is where it changes. You can say from the client that payment will be made on delivery of final product, within 30 days of delivery. This depends on how you want to handle it with your client. Now, I said I was going to talk about down payments, and here it is. When I have a new client, personally, what I like to tell them is I need 50% down. No matter what, I need 50% down to start, because you're a brand new client. I don't know anything about you. I don't know how you work, anything like that. And I need 50%. And then when I'm done, I need payment on delivery, meaning before I give it to you, you pay me the final amount, and then I throw it in Dropbox, or I throw it on your FTP or whatever it is. But you do not get that final product until that happens. But then I also like to tell them, if you're an ongoing client, then after that, if everything's in good standing, you're net 30. A lot of people say, well, we can only do net 60, net 90. That's a long time. I've generally rarely come up across people that can't do net 30 if you ask them. Now, there are some bigger corporations that will do that. So, if you're working with a client that's already done their first thing, hey, kitty. If you're working with a client that's already worked with you before, then at the end of that statement, you can say, the client guarantees payment will be made within 30 days of final product. Okay, now the next section is called time frame. And in the time frame, you could write a couple different things. You could say the final version is due no later than this date. Or you could say that this will take us X amount of weeks to complete. What I like to do most of the time, if there isn't a real hard deadline, is I like to say the final version will take 2 days to complete over a span of 3 weeks. And that's because I have a lot of clients, I have a lot of things going on, and if I just tell somebody 2 days, oh, it's going to take 2 days, oh, it's Monday, I'll have it on Wednesday. Well, that's not exactly what it is. Yeah, I'm charging for 2 days, I'm working for 2 days, but that's 2 days over the entire process. Maybe I spend a couple hours on the initial concept and I email that to them, and then I wait, and then they get back to me the end of that day, and then the next day I start working on it. You know, or maybe I have other things going on, and maybe it takes a couple days to get to it. So you have to be specific in there that it's going to take, I don't know, a week to do this, and you're paying for a week, but it's going to take a month, over the course of a month, because that really helps your client to see, okay, you're only charging me for this, and you're only working for this amount of time, but I shouldn't expect it in that amount of time, because people see that on paper, and then they're like, oh, you're fast, I'm going to get this right away. Well, you know, if you're a busy person and you got a lot of things going on and you're working, that can't be expected. So, the next section is called Estimated Cost Breakdown. And this is basically, you know, what originally you quoted for or you bid on. Estimated cost breakdown. And I put in here modeling an animation at a standard rate of X per day and or X per hour. You can do it that way, or if you have a flat budget, you could say a flat budget of whatever has been agreed on in advance. And that's about it for that. I don't really put much more than what I think it's going to cost. And that is for what it costs initially when you come to the agreement and when you tell them what you're going to provide. And that is assuming that there are no changes, which leads to the next section called change order. Now, what I wrote in here is changes made to the process and or extra hours of requested work will first be approved and will be billed accordingly. So let's say you're working on a project and you've agreed that you're going to do the 3-step process. Then you're going to do, and it's only going to take 3 days. 3-step process, 3 days over the course of whatever. So you get to the end and you've done everything correctly and everybody has signed off on everything and you've done exactly what you've been asked to do. And you get to the end and the client says, you know what, I really want to go back and I want to change this wording on this thing that's on this graphic and it's in there for 2 or 3 shots. You're like, all right, well, you approved of it at the beginning. You approved of it on the 90% deliverable, and now we're at the end. We're on the final version, and I've already spent 3 days on this. So do not be afraid to tell them this is going to take a change order, because you've told them up front that's what it's going to take. You wrote it in the contract. You're going to say, look, you signed off on this, and it's time for us to do a change order agreement. That's where you would do like a version 2 of this contract. Rewrite it, say here's what we're adding to this thing. And when you do that and you send it back over to a client, it's a big deal. You know, if you did it the other way, where you just kind of say, oh, okay, whatever, and you just kind of do it, who's that helping? That's helping them, yeah, I guess, which is okay, but it's taking away from your time and you're not making any more money on it. So it's very important that you lay that out. If you do this and it's a big deal and they got to re-sign a contract, do this from the beginning, and your client is going to respect that, and they're going to respect you, and they're going to respect your time. Using a 3-step process, making sure they sign off on things, making sure it's very clear that if they ask for extra things, they get charged extra. That is what will make your client respect what you're doing. And really, it's to protect you, to make sure that you won't get walked all over. Now, there are some clients that are absolutely great and they totally understand. There are some clients that think that you should be providing everything they ask at any given time, and it shouldn't cost any more. Well, I don't like to work like that, and you probably don't either. And you may say, well, if it's so I can keep the client or get this business. Well, yeah, well, that's up to you to decide. There are little things all the time that I do for clients, and I don't charge extra. But it's little things, and I decide in my own mind, is it worth spending an extra 30 minutes? Is it worth spending an extra hour on this? Is that really going to help me with this client? Is it really worth it? Are they going to bring a bunch more business? Do I need to keep their business that bad? Sometimes it's not worth keeping a client, and I have actually fired clients before, because it's just not worth the stress and the time for the money. It's about what you're worth. A lot of people at the beginning, they actually want to get those clients, and so they take anything they can get. But sometimes that's actually detrimental to what you're doing. So now let me get to the miscellaneous category. Brograph is not responsible for acts of God such as disaster, data loss, or health-related issues that may cause delay in the creation process. Brograph will, however, continue to deliver media under these circumstances as fast and efficiently as possible. Now, why did I write that? Well, everything that you read in the contracts that I make, in the agreements that I make, are there because something happened or somebody did something to make me put that in there. So my contracts are ever evolving. They're like a live thing that's constantly changing, because you know what? I've heard every excuse in the book. I've lost money back in the day. I've done things the wrong way. I've gotten screwed over, honestly. And it's because I didn't think ahead about all the excuses that someone was going to have, because they're going to have these excuses. So here's an example. And this didn't end in a bad way, but in this situation. But this is what made me put this in here. I had a huge project I was working on, and I ended up in the hospital for a week. Now, what's going to happen if you've got a client and you're a one-man operation and you're working on a gig, and what's going to happen when you're in the hospital? Your client's going to say, well, where's my stuff? Oh, I'm in the hospital. Okay, well, my client is still wanting this from me. You're in the hospital. When are you going to get it done? So you know what I was doing? I was working via remote. Thank goodness there was Wi-Fi, and good Wi-Fi in the hospital, working via remote to my home where I had my office. Well, can I do that all the time? Can everybody do that if they're in the hospital? Not necessarily. So it didn't end badly. I got it done. Client was happy. But the thing is that if something happens like that and your client is upset because you can't get it done, you have to have something in there to protect yourself. So that's why I said acts of God, blah, 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 health-related issues. If something happens where a tornado hits your house and you lose your data, you have no control over that, and you've protected yourself in this, especially if you're incorporated. But I did write in there that if something happens, we'll continue to deliver as fast as we can, as efficiently as we can, which leaves it open for you to get the work done and still be protected and still say, look, I wrote this into here. You signed this. You said you understood. Hopefully that never happens to you. All right, the next section that I put in here, which I think is very important, is about source files, because this is something that comes up a lot. More so with stuff like After Effects, I think, probably with Final Cut and stuff like that. But do you give your client source files? Well, that's really difficult. My answer is no. I do not give clients source files, especially when it comes to Cinema 4D. Absolutely not. There's no way. I'm not giving that stuff away. After Effects, it depends. There are many After Effects things that I've done that are, I don't want to say they're not important or they're low grade or whatever, but they're very simple things. You know, scale, rotate, ease in, ease out, position, keyframe, done. You know, stuff that I'm not concerned. If somebody opens that file, they're not learning any trade secrets. So here's what I've written. Source files remain the property of Brograph. These files may contain trade secrets. Project files such as After Effects, Photoshop, Illustrator, or 3D design files are not considered deliverables unless specifically outlined and agreed upon in the above deliverables section. So say you have a client, you must put in what you're going to deliver on the top. If you say you're only going to deliver the video files, you're only going to deliver the video files. That's all you have to deliver. And I actually came up with my own formula as to what I charge for project files. And it's based upon the actual project and how much it costs, and it's a percentage of that project. So if they want to buy the project files, they come back, say, we need these project files. You say, okay, well, I didn't agree to give you project files, especially Cinema 4D. I mean, you're working hard. You're doing some crazy, you know, mocha, espresso, whatever stuff in your project files, and you're doing all sorts of crazy stuff. You don't want to give the secrets away. If you came up with something really cool, and you don't want someone else to just take that and go with it, and then you don't get any credit for it, royalties almost, you know. You want to make sure that you're protecting yourself in that. I mean, of course, that's what this whole thing is about, protecting yourself, right? So you want to make sure that if you're really good with your craft and you're doing really cool stuff, those files aren't just getting out to other people and they're re-rendering them and making money off of them and you don't get anything. So I've also put in here, all delivered material will be considered for display and demonstration purposes on our website unless otherwise specified. Any requests to take down materials will be honored at any time. Now, the reason that I wrote it that way is because when I make stuff, I like to put it in my reel. I like to put it on the website. And unless it's something super top secret, I'm going to put it on the website. And just, if it's something that I think looked really good and I want to show it off, I'll put it on there. But at the same time, I'm letting the client know that if for some reason there's, you know, some legal reason or, you know, something comes up and they don't want their material out there, I will take it down. But it's just a way for me to slip in, hey, I'm going to put this on my website without having to go back later and find the person and ask them if I can put it on the website and have them email me back and forth and say yes and wait for their answer. All that stuff. It's just, it's in there. It's good to go. You can throw anything on your website and not worry about asking anybody. Payment will be made regardless if final project is used for intended purpose by any first or third parties involved in this specified project. Now, can you imagine what happened in this case? This has happened to me before. That's why it's in the contract. And I have heard, if you look at clientsfromhell.net, you hear horror stories about design and how people will spend hours and hours and hours making stuff and days and a month making something. And then they give it to their client and they're like, well, you know, it's really great, but, you know, I don't think right now we're going to put it on our website like we wanted to. So we're not going to pay you right now. Well, it doesn't mean you didn't do the work. Of course you did the work. You spent the time. You put in the hours. And I guarantee you that a lot of those people didn't have a contract. But just in case, I've put it in here. Because what will happen is you'll do it and you'll do it for a client who has their own client. And then that client will not pay them. Okay, well, that's not your problem. You know, if I make a graphic for a video production company and they're making that for, let's say, some financial company who's making a video, and the financial company goes under or they don't pay for net 90, but my terms with this production company were net 30, doesn't matter. I'm sorry, but you got to have cash flow. And if you're working with companies that don't have cash flow, then you might want to rethink who you're working with. It doesn't matter and that's why third party is written in here, because if their third party, their financial company they're working for, decides they're not going to post this video on the web and they don't pay them, you're protected because you have an agreement with the production company, not with the financial company that's paying them. It is your work. You're spending the time on it. You deserve to get paid no matter what happens. And that's why that line is in there. Project delay. Now here's another one. This is the same example. Let's say you're working on a project. It's a pretty big project. Say you're working on a nice $5,000-$10,000 project, a nice chunk of change. And you're like, man, I could really use that money right now. Well, you want to finish this as quick as possible so you can get paid, right? Well, your client's probably in a really big hurry to get started. And then you get started and you get everything going and something happens on their end. Maybe it's the same situation. Maybe they're a production company. They're working for some financial company and those people are dragging their feet. They're taking a long time. They're not getting back to them or whatever. And then your client's not getting back to you. This has happened to me before, where all of a sudden it was hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, and now we're waiting. And all of a sudden it's been a month. It's been 2 months. It's been 3 months. We're in the middle of a project. What happens? You've done half the work, but you haven't finished the work. Well, I wrote something in there for that too, because it's happened to me. Project delay. Project delays due to client decision processes may not exceed 90 days without a signed project delay contract. Now, recently I've changed that to 30 days. If a delay contract has not been signed after 30 days, Brograph retains the right to bill for any labor and/or equipment costs incurred to the point of halted production. Invoicing for such costs will be billed net 30 and include a 10% late fee compounded monthly thereafter. Let's talk about what all that means. If somebody says they're waiting to hear from so-and-so and it drags and it drags and it drags and it drags. I had 90 days in there at first, but 90 days is a long time. So I've put 30 because if somebody can't get back to you within a month, it sounds like their production is probably going to be halted or massively delayed. So what you want to do is write that in there and tell them, look, I'm going to bill for any of the labor that I've put in up to this point. I'm not going to charge you extra, but I'm going to charge you for what I did. And I'll also charge you for equipment costs, stock photos, camera rental, light rental, all the kind of stuff that they may or may not have paid for, some of it up front. But, if you've got a cash flow and you're fronting the money on rentals, because God knows in this industry, owning your own gear is a whole nother thing. You're probably renting like I do. Rent the camera for the type of gig I'm doing. Probably costs $300, $400, $500 to do that rental for a camera. And at that point, you're kind of stuck. You've probably got to deal with a rental company, and you've probably already paid for your stock photography or your stock video. You probably got, or your stock models in this example. You probably got to deal with the rental company that's net 30, and they're going to want their money. They're going to want their $500 for that camera in 30 days. Well, you got someone that's dragged their feet for 30 days. Now you've fronted the money because you want to stay in good standing with your rental company. And what do? You've got to bill for it because you got to get that money. So that's in there so that you don't get stuck holding the bill for another company who's holding the bill for another company. You want to go ahead and make sure that you're protected and that your client knows straight up front on paper with their signed signature on there that, hey, if you drag your feet, I'm going to charge you. And then whenever you want to continue on, we'll continue on. But you got to pay me up to that point. Total estimates. A total production cost estimate of blank. In this case, we'll say this is a new client. We'll say, a total production cost estimate of blank will be paid 50% via cash, check, or charge before production begins. All approvals will be fully watermarked until final payment is made on delivery, or you could change that to fit like we talked about earlier, however that's going to work. A charge of 10% will be added after an invoice is late for 30 days. An additional 10% will be compounded every 30 days thereafter. Now, that's what I do on anything late. You get charged 10%. It's in writing. They know they're going to get charged percent if it's 10% if it's late. And I do compounded because, man, that adds up quickly, doesn't it? And it's, if they're looking at this and they're reading it and it says, look, if you're late, this is going to get really expensive really fast. 10% of your bill, and then after 30 days, the 10% of that entire bill plus the 10% late fees, it's 10% of that 10% added. That's really going to make people think before they do any delay in paying you. Now, the other thing you can do if this is an existing client is say a total production cost estimate of blank will be paid net 30 after final sign off on product. And then the end of this contract, I put just contract, and this is the part where they sign, and it says all work to be completed in a workmanlike manner according to standard practices. Any alteration or deviation from the specifications above involving extra cost will be executed only upon written orders and will become an extra charge over and above the costs mentioned on the above contract. Pretty straightforward, right? Your client, whatever their name is, concurs that Brograph will take no responsibility for any loss or damage related to the production or distribution of this work. All marketing decisions are ultimately the responsibility of client's name. This is because if you're working with marketing, especially in this industry, you're creating this stuff because they want it produced. So what if they are producing something that's controversial and you make it and they're like, oh, this is controversial and everybody's upset at us and we don't want to pay for this. Sorry. Or what if they make something that's like some sort of promotional video and it's supposed to be promotional and marketing. And they throw it out there and their feedback isn't really good in as far as drawing in business for their company, or this video was supposed to make us a bunch of money, or this video is supposed to be viral on the internet, and it's not viral. I hate that word. When somebody makes a video and they're really excited about it, and they want you to do this and they want you to do that, and then they put it out there and nothing happens. Well, that's kind of their decision, because you, as a creative, maybe you've had some input on that, but if you're not marketing yourself as like an ad agency, if you're just marketing yourself as a graphic designer, you're just manufacturing what they're requesting. So that wording is in there just to kind of make sure that they're not expecting you to produce something that's going to be viral for the sake of being viral. It's ultimately their responsibility to make their own marketing decisions and decide what they want, or hire a marketing person and consult with them. If that person's going to be responsible for how many clicks they get on something, that's fine. But what you're creating in 3D or 2D or video or motion graphics shouldn't really have anything to do with what their marketing decisions are. So afterwards, then I just have print your name, signature, date, and then at the bottom, put a little disclaimer in there. It says the information provided in this document is confidential and it remains property of Brograph. It is not intended to be shared with third parties or anyone not involved in business transactions between the intended parties and Brograph. And that's just a little bit of generic legal mumbo jumbo that I threw in there, and that's because I'm not a big fan of other people, seeing what my contract was with somebody. I don't want a client to see how we worked with somebody and why we priced for this and why we priced for that and the deals that we worked out, back and forth. I don't want them to see that, and also it keeps people from sharing bids with anybody else. If I find out that someone wanted a bid from me, and they wanted a bid from 2-3 other companies, and then I find out I gave a bid first, and then they gave that bid to these other companies and said, hey, base it off of this and make a new bid. If I find out about that, well, they've signed already, and usually I put the same disclaimer on a bid, by the way. They've signed already that they are not going to share this. Now, let's talk about the whole contract in general. Let's talk about how binding it is. It depends on where you are, especially what country you're in, but what state you're in, and how a court is going to interpret it. You've got union states and right-to-work states, and this stuff really can vary how binding it is. The one thing that I'd say that it does help with and has helped with is when in the past I didn't have a contract with somebody, and we really didn't talk about any terms at all. And maybe they did pay me, maybe they paid me late or whatever. I think if they would have had a contract, that they at least would have felt like there was a little bit of something binding there, even if, if it would have gotten to court and it would have gone to, to some ridiculous level of court process. What's the word I'm looking for? I think that if you're in a situation where somebody says they're not going to pay you or they can't pay you, just having this piece of paper is really a good thing to have, and it's really helpful. You could, if you go to a lawyer, let's say, and you say, so-and-so told me they were going to pay me $500 to do this, and they say, well, where's the contract? That's the first thing they're going to ask you. And you say, well, we didn't really have a contract. It was word of mouth. They're going to be like, oh, well, it's going to be really hard for me to help you because it's kind of hearsay. Now, you might have a contract. If you do, it may or may not work. You may lose. You may go to court and lose. But at least you had the signed document to get the process going if someone didn't pay you. Now, what I will say about cost is there are some very small projects. Oh, hey, kitty. Hi. Yeah. So there are some projects that I consider not where it doesn't really seem like it's enough trouble to even draw up a contract. If there's something I'm going to do on a day rate, let's say, I usually just tend to say, you know what, don't worry about it. We'll just take care of it. If you're with a client that you're very, very comfortable with, sometimes it's not even necessary. If it's not a real big project, just say, no, that's cool. We'll just get it done. Because they've signed the contracts before. They always pay you on time. It's the bigger projects that really, really need these contracts. I tend to just have that as a rule. If it's going to take any more than 1 day, then I'm going to do a contract. Because if somebody doesn't pay me for 1 day of work, honestly, it's not the end of the world. And sometimes it's a big pain to set these things up. So as far as the contract process goes with sending it to people, what I like to do is create a generic agreement, and I put in my company name, and I put in a blank for the other company name and such, and then I go in and just do a replace all for the word client in all caps and just put in their name inside my document. And then I go through and just kind of read it and make sure everything's good to go. But I use a service called signnow.com, and that lets you save this out as a PDF, and you put the PDF into their service, and you can put in your own fill-in-the-blank type stuff. You can say, here's my name. You can save your signature, so you can just pop your signature in there on the agreement when it's done. But then you can do places for them to sign, and they can digitally sign, and it's considered notarized. The reason I do it that way with that service is for that very reason. It's notarized, so when your client gets this from a notarization type company, then they know that what they're signing is a little more binding. It's not like you showed up with a piece of paper and they signed it and you put it in your pocket. This is something where there's kind of a third party. You've both signed it through a third party, and it has a little more legal standing if something does happen, and God forbid, some sort of situation where you're not getting paid. So I hope that wasn't too long-winded, and I hope that's helpful. It just seems like I hear all the time, how do I write a contract or a service agreement? What do I do? What kind of wording do I put in there? And it just really seems like nobody has a really good answer for that. I found a couple things online, but I never find any video about this. So hopefully that was helpful. If you like what you see here, from time to time, I'll be doing some more Brograph talks when I think of a good topic. Other than that, it's just going to be mostly tutorials. So, Facebook, get on our Facebook, facebook.com/Brograph, and add us on there so you can see what we're doing and get updates, or Twitter. If you're a Twitter type person, follow us on there. You can always go to Brograph.com and see everything we're doing. We separate the experiments and Brograph talks and tutorials into different sections, so you can go to different categories and watch what you feel in the mood to watch. We love seeing everybody on Reddit, always in the Cinema 4D subreddit, and there is a Reddit subreddit for Brograph as well. If you just want to get kind of a feed of everything that we're posting, it's not really like a forum or a place for discussion or anything. I like to just stay in the Cinema 4D forums or subreddit for that. Subscribe on YouTube, please. We're doing really well on YouTube. We got a lot of subscribers. It's going up and up every day. So please hit subscribe. You'll get everything that we do straight into your main YouTube page when you log on to YouTube. Vimeo is in the works. If you happen to see us on Vimeo, we've put what we have on there, but the way that their quotas and stuff work, I'm trying to like do this large dump of all the Vimeo, all the tutorials and everything onto Vimeo at the same time, and it's massive. And so Vimeo is like, no, you can't post all these all at once. So they're slowly making their way up in chunks. You know, I just do my weekly quota once a week until they're all up there. And then once we get them on there, then all the new ones will be coming out on Vimeo. So if you're more of a Vimeo person, which I know a lot of graphic designers are, that is in the works, so that you'll be able to follow us or whatever you do on Vimeo and get all the new tutorials when they come out that way. So that about wraps it up. Hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, have a good one. Later, bros. It's pretty good, I guess.